Well, throughout human history, the desire to spread our civilization has been led by people who want to explore. We tend to be a people who like exploring. We like seeing different things. We like learning about new things. Ancient voyagers include the Phoenicians, whose tin artifacts may have indicated that they traveled as far as Britain. We have Greek travelers who were the first to circumnavigate Britain and ended up exploring what is now Germany. And we see this throughout history that we continue to explore and to find these new places. But was there ever a time in history where people didn't have the urge to explore? Maybe they all just wanted to sit in one place and build one city, perhaps. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why the people in Genesis 11 and verse 4 were afraid of being scattered. So if you'd like to turn over to Genesis 11, verse 4, we're going to start there. This is the story of the Tower of Babel, as I'm sure you're aware. And this is kind of the founding of what Babylon was. We see Babylon throughout the Bible and throughout end-time prophecies. It continued to be a strong powerhouse throughout time. And this Tower of Babel was at the very forefront of what we now understand is Babylon. So if you're in Genesis 11, let's read verse 4. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." So there's 4 different parts to this scripture. There's 2 sentences here, and they're split up by commas. And we're going to go through each part individually to really understand what this is talking about. So this first part here says, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." So understand this, let's start talking about the Babylonian religion a little bit. In ancient Mesopotamia and Babylon in general, there was this idea that the city was founded by a god. And what happened in heaven was a reflection of what was happening on earth. So this is quite interesting. Essentially, the battles that were determined between 2 cities were actually a worldly reflection of what was happening in heaven. So if 2 cities were fighting against each other, it meant that actually what was happening is that the 2 gods of those 2 cities were actually fighting against each other, and that this was just a earthly manifestation of this heavenly battle. What this meant is that if one city conquered a different city, it was almost to show that that god was more powerful. God was better than the other god. But remember what I said above, that a city was not founded by a man. The city was always founded by a god. Men were allowed to build wells, they were allowed to have homes, they were allowed to farm, they were allowed to sell things, build altars, possibly create villages or trading posts or things like that. But the one thing a man was not able to do was to found or build a city. That was the role for a god. So we can start to see this issue here that we'll expound upon in this message. But it's what the people were actually saying, is they're not just saying, let's build a city. But what they're actually saying is, we shall be as gods. Let's go to the second point here. A tower whose top is in the heavens. Some translations here, the New King James gets it right. Some translations, including the Old King James and some other various ones, include may reach or reaches to. So like a tower that may reach the heavens or things like that. These are added words and not correct. It says a tower whose top is in the heavens. And I want you to consider that this phrase here isn't necessarily only talking about height. We commonly think of this phrase as they were trying to build the tallest tower possible. They were trying to build something 20 times the Burj Khalifa or something like that. Our Earth's atmosphere is roughly 39,000 feet up, and that is a baffling statement even for modern man to think about creating something that tall. And while there's a possibility that they were trying to get incredibly tall, I want you to also think about the realities that they're trying to say that the head of their tower would be in the heavens. There's 2 interesting commentaries about this tower that I found. One interpretation focuses more on the tower as a center for power, for influence, as a survey or a command of the region around it. So in the instance of this tower would have been one in heaven. Therefore, there's a connotation of this tower of invading heaven or something like that. Another interpretation I found was that the tower, by its top being in heaven, would be some form of passageway between earth and heaven, and they could almost bring a god back down to earth. I like the thought of bringing both of these together, because I don't think either one fits without the other one. But they were trying to bring the power of man into heaven, while likewise bringing the power of God onto the earth. Again, we have a reiteration of the last phrase, where they're trying to set themselves up above God, or trying to become gods themselves. A reiteration of the same sin. The third phrase here, let us make a name for ourselves. The Israelites, and what we see throughout the Bible, and even throughout time, where God is the one who gets the glory. We give God's name his glory, and that's what we see throughout the Bible. Psalm 29 verse 1 says, give unto the Lord glory. Psalm 115 verse 1 says, not unto us, but to your name give glory, talking about God. Isaiah 48, and there's many other times I'm sure you can find that we're supposed to give praise and glory to God. But you can kind of see in this phrase here that this is already contrary to what the Babylonians wanted. The Babylonians wanted their city to give themselves glory. God didn't have a part in this. Glory to their name, meaning that they would have more power and influence over the cities around them. There are many cities and towns and things, and they wanted this power and influence over a wider area, presumably over the whole earth. Remember the phrase, or remember the concept I talked about at the very beginning about how a city would subdue other cities only if its god was more powerful than the other god. So by saying this phrase here, the making a name for ourselves, they're saying that whether they would climb to heaven or God would climb down to them, either way they would make themselves so powerful that there wouldn't be a city or a nation around them who could destroy them. They were claiming that this method would result in a more powerful God than any of the rest of the known world. And the fourth phrase here, lest we be scattered abroad. While at first glance it's easy to think that maybe this is talking about just traveling or expanding or things like that, I believe it's a bit deeper than that. We even see that the Babylonians continued to conquer and explore the known world many hundreds of years after that. So it wouldn't really make sense that this city in particular, and at this time, they didn't have that ideology. The reality is that they were trying to avoid being scattered, which is a Hebrew idiom to express the destruction of a civilization by its enemy. The Hebrew verb here, to be scattered, is in a form that which applied to a group of people is talking about, is found throughout the Bible. So for example, there's Isaiah 41 verse 16, where it says, and the whirlwind shall scatter them. This is talking about Israel's enemies. Jeremiah 13:24, therefore I will scatter them like stubble, talking about God scattering the faithless Israelites. Habakkuk 3:14, talking about the nations that God had destroyed to Israel. So there's several times this phrase is used, and this isn't talking about a want or a lack of wanting to explore or to conquer or to travel or things like this. It's literally talking about their nation and their land and that being taken away from them. We see this also similarly when we talk about shepherds. Sometimes we say that a shepherd and his flock are being scattered or things like that. It's not that the flock just wanted to go explore or go conquer new lands. It's that this flock was literally driven off of their land. So I go back to my question, the purpose of this message. Why were the people afraid to be scattered? Who is their enemy? At this point, it should be clear, I think, going through the 4 different passages, that their enemy was clearly God, and that they were trying to, in effort, declare war on God and on the heavenly realm. And they knew that their retribution was coming, one that would essentially destroy their entire nation. I want you to note that they didn't build the city to avoid being scattered. The second phrase says very clearly that they built the city to have a name. But since they were upsetting all these gods that they thought that they had, they also believed that they were inviting all of this wrath. So rather than viewing this as a defensive mechanism, like I need to build a city so that we're not scattered, the reality is that we should be reading it more as, I know I'm going to anger all the gods by building this city, but my tower will be so strong that there won't be a single god out there able to destroy it. They had convinced themselves that once they were able to reach heaven, that they would be powerful enough to subdue any god or any human who tried to attack them, because they would essentially be above all of the gods. Then in the next verse, we come to God's response. It's an interesting note here that God had to come down to see them. I find that a funny thing that the author wrote, that no matter how tall the tower was or what progress was made, that he still had to come down. But let's read verse 6 real quick. It says, "And the Lord said, indeed the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." So God makes it very clear here that they can, and if they weren't stopped, they would have succeeded in this plan. The UCG Bible Commentary notes that, quote, "Man had once again decided to use his intellect and energies to live contrary to God. Without God, evil permeates, and among wonderful technological advances comes also the ability to destroy the world. To end this ungodly effort and to accomplish his purpose of widely dispersing men over the face of the earth and preventing rapid technological development that would lead to weapons of mass destruction sooner than his time frame allowed, God confounded the languages of men." End quote. And remember here that scatter doesn't mean that he physically scattered, but he destroyed their nation and drove them out of his land. We also know that later on, another Babylon was built in the same spot, and it continued, but it never had this unity, or this oneness that the original Babel had to challenge God. So in conclusion, this passage here, this couple of verses about the Tower of Babel, isn't a story about how the people refused to travel or to journey across new places around the world, to colonize other areas or to explore or things like that. Rather, this is about man's direct attempt to thwart and to overthrow God himself in heaven. The first phrase is essentially them saying, "We will be like the gods." The second phrase is about building a tower higher than the heavens so that they can become a god themselves. The third phrase is contrary to God in that they wanted to exemplify their own name above all others instead of the name of God. And the fourth phrase here is their desire to be a united nation and not to have that taken from them. This is a symbol of humans' desire to exalt their own culture and nature above the nature of God's. And the Tower of Babel represents a cultural unity that we've never seen since then and won't see until the end of the world. So why then were the people afraid to be scattered? They were building the tower in a direct contradiction to God and God's way of life, effectively trying to declare war on him, and they knew that the retribution that God had could very well destroy them.